This is Obal, and here is another super exciting Guardian guide full of exploits and wonders. It was a huge surprise that there really weren't many things changing in the feature patch for the Guardian. The builds really haven't changed much, so I'm mostly going to go over 2 neglected weapons that should really be used currently in the Guardian meta, as well as the math across all the builds so you can see what you're gaining and giving up in return, as well as make some clarifications on many things, and I'll be going over what little did change over the amazing feature patch. So I'm going to go over weapon choices first before I go over the builds. I'm going to go over the 2 neglected weapons I talked about earlier, which are the mace and the torch. I put them in my guide about a month ago, the written one at least. I tell people to use them, they think I'm trolling them, and I'm not really the trolling type, so I give them the numbers. And you can see here that sword and mace are nearly identical damage in a Greatsword rotation, and you can see the numbers for the team setting that they don't even include vuln. You'll be doing a little bit more vuln than you would with the sword because you have symbolic exposure, and the numbers will even out even more. And for scepter, swapping off scepter for a large hitbox target will only decrease your DPS, so you want to camp scepter, so a torch would be a great thing to have on swap, and that's because you can use smite, then your focus skills, and then you can get off 2 torch 4s, which do almost as much damage as Shield of Wrath does. And then swap back to scepter focus, and your focus skills will just be coming off recharge, and you can see from the numbers you get quite a boost from using a torch in your rotation. You want to use pure scepter builds against large hitbox bosses like the Molten Duo, Loopy, Casual Hunger, Nightmare Tree, that sort of thing. You want to use hammer for some fractal content where the bosses and trash hit very hard, and it will turn their 1 to 2 shot attacks into 2 to 3 shots. And you don't want to use it for all fractals anymore, since you can change your build wherever you are in the fractal if you're out of combat. And it's also great for people that are new or struggling. Granted, you'll want to move on from it later on. And it's also good for pugging. Helps people that don't like to dodge, and you probably won't be messing up people's fire fields because they probably won't be making them and blasting them. So there's no harm done. For secondary weapons with the hammer, you will want a staff for some fractal content where you can pull mobs to a line of sight spot. And this would be places like the Grawl fractal, where the Grawl just run up the hill and you could put a line of warding down to CC them and just blind reflect before they can even start doing anything. And Greatsword would be your primary secondary weapon, and that's because the utility value of binding blades is great. Group up mobs, swap the hammer, DPS them down. And you also want to use it for bursting, doing rotations between hammer and Greatsword when things get a little easier. And mace focus actually pulls ahead with some builds in some situations, doing perfect rotations. So that's also a good choice too, but you mostly want to use it for the additional blocks against harder bosses like Arch Diviner and Mossman. Makes it a lot easier. You really have no need to use an energy sigil, and you really don't feel the Vigorous Precision nerf anymore. Mace is really strong in fractals. You want to use Greatsword builds for the most part. They do the most damage, other than against large hitbox targets where you would use Scepter. They're the best for dungeons, open world, and easier fractal content. And you want to use a one-handed weapon and focus on swap. And you want to use a Scepter against the medium hitbox boss that will die in about 10 seconds. And the reason for that is you can get a smite off in your focus skills, and then it should die after you swap the Greatsword and use all your burst skills. And a boss like that would be the end AC bosses. For everything else, you want to use sword or mace. You want to use a sword against harder trash, and where there are lots of projectiles. You also want to use it when cleaving isn't an issue because it will be top DPS. And part of the reason for that is because it's so easy to use sword. All you have to do is auto attack to do the max damage for it. And use your focus skills eventually in the rotation. And for mace, you want to use mace against trash that doesn't hit very hard, or there are lots of conditions. The reason for that is because you can keep up people's scholar buffs with the weak heals that it does. It should be enough to keep it up if it gets stripped by a little bit, and that's really where the mace excels. Another place where the mace excels is fractals, because sword cleave sucks there for the most part. And pretty much anywhere where cleaving with the sword is an issue, you want to use mace over it. It's also best against small hitbox bosses that are going to die in about 10 seconds, so you can get a symbol up as well as the focus skills, and then swap the Greatsword for bursting. Sword doesn't have anything bursty on it to use up before you swap the Greatsword. So I'm going to go over the Greatsword builds first, and this is what you would run when you need some more support. And you would bring Fiery Wrath and Zealous Blade most of the time. The only time this would really change is when you need Spirit Weapon Mastery for the Imbued Shaman, so you can always have shield up for his transitions. And you should pretty much always bring Blind Exposure, Powerful Blaze when you use a sword. When you're using Scepter or Mace, you want Radiant Fire. And for virtues, you'll pretty much always want Master Consecrations and Unscathed Contender. You can swap one of these out if you need more support, and that would come from Absolute Resolution for condition removal and Indomitable Courage to get more stability. For when you don't need much or any support, you want to run this build, and it's more reliable DPS than the Unscathed builds. Unscathed builds, you need about 25% Aegis uptime to even break even, which is hard oftentimes for dungeons and fractals when there's lots of trash. Open world as well. And if you're just doing content solo, your Aegis is going to get stripped pretty often. And you'll pick up Amplified Wrath, Rand Strength, Retributive Armor. You want to use this for Scepter build as well, except you would swap your Zealous Blade for Scepter Power, and make sure you have Radiant Fire on. When it is easy to keep up Unscathed Contender, you'll want to run this build for Greatsword, and you want to run this build for Scepter. And for Lupicus, you can go 46004, pick up Consecrated Ground and Unscathed Contender. And for hammer builds, you'll be running the same ones, and you want to run this one for more support, and your different trait choices that you're picking up over the Greatsword builds and Scepter would be in the Honor line. You pick up Superior Aria and Root Persistence. You don't really need much support at all. You just want to dump your points like I just did there to pick up Symbolic Power, since most of your damage is going to come from symbols from the hammer, and Zealous Blades when you do burst with Greatsword. If you're planning on camping hammer, it really isn't a bad choice with this build, since you're only going to lose out on maybe 3% damage. You want to pick up Binding Jeopardy, and that'll give you a nice boost in Vuln, along with your symbol and spamming Virtue. The one good thing that they did change in the feature patch is Shield of the Avenger. You want to use that and use the command immediately so that you can use Aegis again after. The shield has a delay of going up anyway, so using the command isn't really going to change that. And you can get an additional Aegis up before it goes away. So you get 2 more Aegises. This is going to be really strong in fractals. I would still use Retreat over it in general use, where you don't really need a ton of reflex and you don't need both wall and shield. since it'll be more reliable Aegis and it lasts longer. And when you have a free slot, Sword of Justice will be good, but only in unoptimal groups. And the reason for that is in optimal groups you should be running an NG, since they should be in pretty much any group, since they will stack lots and lots of vuln, since FGS is dead. And your sword will not be getting might when you stack might with your group, so that'll make it even less worthwhile. Again, like I said, it's good for unoptimal groups instead of Bane, since you will be doing extra vuln, and the damage that you would be doing would be pretty on par with that of Bane. As far as tombs go, you really would only be using them as you normally would. If you really don't need renewed, you can use tomb for quickness. It'd be nice if they changed that to make the cast quicker. Of course they didn't. It's not good for DPS. Your typical rotations under pretty much any build will outdamage it. So I'll use it for the Fury. For gear, you won't want gear to look like mine. Mine's pretty broken because I'm bad. I'm just an elitist tryhard. But you'll still want to get Zerker gear anyway, like I do. And you want Scholar runes in it. They are the best runes for Guardian. It's true that there are some builds, mostly Hammer, where a few Assassin's pieces will be best to mix in with your Zerk. But overall, most builds will benefit from full Zerk, so I'd suggest full Zerk. And the next best rune choice would be Flame Legion, and comparing DPS of Flame Legion runes to Scholar, it'll be about having 60% Scholar uptime if the target is permanent burning. And if you really need to, you can get a set of Knight's gear or Celestial or Soldier's armor, and I would just keep everything else Zerk if you're just starting out or you're struggling. It'll be about 8 to 15% DPS loss, assuming you have Scholar runes as well. It's not too bad. It gives you an extra hit for most things, so it's definitely an option. For infusions, I would just go with power at this point. They won't hurt you at all, since you won't be going over any caps like you would with precision. And here's what you would run on each weapon as far as sigils go. Combinations of Knight, Force, and Slaying would be best where they apply. And for daytime it gets a little more tricky. And you can see I've written out each one. You have Force and a sigil or a different sigil. That'll be based on if you're capping on a might and crit chance. And you can see I've listed everything here except shield, since it's the bare bow of Guardian weapons. It's really not worth running still. Here's the DPS across all the builds, courtesy of the keys. And hope you enjoyed another super exciting Guardian build. Bye, Obal. Good day.